All right, cool. So, yeah, my name is Jules Arrighi, or a lot of people call me Jules as well. And learning is my job, but it's also something I've been passionate about for pretty much all of my life. So I'm very excited to talk to you today about bold learning and going on learning adventures. So I gave a talk about a year ago about creating safe learning experiences in order to welcome different types of people to communities and events that you might be running or fostering. And I think that's why the organizers asked me to talk to you today. I will talk about that a little bit later on in my talk, but obviously that's not the focus today. So I think in learning there's this tension between safe and unsafe, doubt and competence that's really important. And a lot of our best learning takes place when we're a little bit unconfident, when we have some doubt, when there's frustration or challenge. But it can be really hard to embrace that mental space when you don't feel some other kind of security to take risks. So this event is a very safe place. It's built with a lot of love, as you heard from Rachel. I think you always feel that from Rachel, the love that goes into the things that she helps organize with the rest of the organizers. And these people sitting in the room with you are safe people. So I want to encourage all of you to take advantage of this safe opportunity to practice being bold learners. Oops. I'll be honest with you, though. I've been having a pretty hard time with this lately. Oh, let me just... All right. Cool. So I've been having a pretty hard time with this lately. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today are things that I struggle with and fall short of a lot. And actually, this talk is sort of a pep talk for myself. So hopefully that pep talk to myself is also helpful for you. All right, cool. So bold learners. What do bold learners do? So I think the easiest way to kind of describe what bold learners do, the simplest and most concise, is that bold learners go on learning adventures. Right? So what is a learning adventure? So I think that learning adventures include three things. So there's some kind of a risk of failure. They involve other people, so it feels maybe a little public, at least one other person. So one other person could potentially see that failure. And they take you to the edge of your comfort zone. So this is the kind of learning that I'm going to talk about today for the most part. So to me, reading a book, while you might learn something from reading a book, that doesn't feel like a learning adventure to me. And also, a lot of traditional school settings do a lot of work to make the learning process very safe. And so that's not really what I'm thinking about either. Although, if you're returning to school after being out of school for a while, that really does often feel like an adventure. Or if you're taking a class that stretches you, that also might feel like an adventure. Some other career-related examples of this might be taking on a new type of project that you've never done before, maybe starting a new job, or switching careers. But one of my favorite examples of a learning adventure that I went on recently was a talk that I did for a meetup group. So the organizer of the Python user group asked PyLadies if we could help find a speaker to do a talk. And it was about 2 weeks ahead of the event. And we asked a couple of people, but it didn't seem like any of them were available. And the organizer kind of wanted someone to talk about testing. So I thought, I have been kind of wanting to get better at testing and practice testing and learn more about it. And I probably can figure out enough to do a beginner level talk in 2 weeks. Might be a little challenging, but I'll go ahead and do that. And there were a couple of times I didn't think I would succeed, but I was able to get through that. I asked for help from some friends. For example, Georgia helped me out a bit with that. And I think it went okay, even with a little bit of live coding. So I think that was a kind of a successful learning adventure. All right, so talks and projects seem like pretty clear examples of learning adventures, but there's also some other activities that can kind of provide mini adventures. So some things like that are just sharing your ideas or expertise, even if that's just in a conversation. There can be a little bit of risk there. Sometimes it feels very personal to expose your own ideas and thoughts. And so that feels like a little mini learning adventure to me. The value of that is it's a really great opportunity to validate your ideas and find where you might be missing something. So I think it's worthwhile. Those kinds of things test your understanding. Other ways of testing your understanding are trying to build something with some knowledge that you've obtained another way. Or literally taking some kind of a test, like a certification, that might be on the edge of your comfort zone, or having a conversation with an expert. Another sort of mini adventure that might feel pretty risky sometimes is asking for help. So there's a lot of risk there about maybe people thinking that you're not as capable. But people generally want to help, and you're going to learn something, usually from asking for help. All right, so generally, I think this involves just saying yes to opportunities, taking the opportunities to learn where they come up. So take a minute to think about what learning adventures you've taken in the past or are working on right now. Or is there something that you're trying to learn right now that you could turn into a learning adventure, make it a little bit, make the stakes a little bit higher? And I'll talk about now why it might be helpful to do that. So to understand some of the kind of feelings that go along with learning adventures, I use this modeling technique that I learned several years ago called causal loop diagrams. So causal loop diagrams can help you understand the effects of complex systems, and I find that sometimes in situations like this, they're helpful to kind of understand why you might be having trouble with something. So the way these work is that there are different components of the system, and the components of the system have relationships with each other. And where the relationships are positive, where an increase in one quantity increases another quantity, we can represent that with a plus sign. And when we have the reverse, where an increase causes a decrease in another quantity, we can represent that with a negative sign. And so I'm going to start off with two things we've talked about a little bit so far. So risk and doubt. So when we do bold learning, we increase the risk, right? And if we kind of go to a safer method of learning, we might be decreasing the risk. So we have our positive and negative signs there. The more risk you're taking, you're probably going to have more doubt. So we can put a positive sign there. And then as you have more doubt, the less likely you are to engage in these bold, risky learning adventures. So does anybody notice anything interesting so far in this diagram? So I see this motion, see a loop. So between risk, doubt, and bold learning, there's a loop there. So that's why this is called causal loop diagrams. And the loops are what make the systems interesting. So we might find reinforcing loops or balancing loops in systems like this. And so a reinforcing loop would be something like interest. So you put money into an account and you get interest, so there's more money, so you get more interest. So that's a reinforcing loop. It keeps going up. The example of a balancing loop would be something where the higher you get, the harder it is to keep moving forward. So maybe the running speed as you get more tired. So you might start off running really fast, and as you get more tired, you're going to slow down a little bit. So eventually, in that situation, you're probably going to come to a stop at some point. So that's a balancing loop. So any guesses what kind of loop this one is? Who thinks that this is a reinforcing loop? And who thinks that this is a balancing loop? All right, yeah. So, and it might not be clear right away because there's kind of 3 steps here. But one quick way that you can tell reinforcing loops and balancing loops is by the number of negative signs. So when we have one negative sign, we get a balancing loop. As the risk increases, the doubt increases, and that prevents us from doing bold learning. So eventually, we're going to stop doing those learning experiences. All right. The doubt also, though, might, if it gets high enough, might even prevent us from doing safe learning experiences, from doing, from like things like reading a book on a certain topic, if we've had some bold learning that scared us about that. And this is interesting because that one's actually a reinforcing loop. And so that means that we could just kind of keep in this downward spiral of being more and more afraid to learn. So this seems pretty bleak so far, but I don't think it is that bleak. What we want to do is look for ways that we can take away that doubt or increase our resilience to the amount of risk that we're willing to take. But before we talk about that, let's talk about why we would even want to do this in the first place. Risk might seem like a negative thing. So risk means that the higher the risk, the more failures we might have, and probably the fewer number of successes that we might have. And successes lead to learning, right? But failures also lead to learning, and often failures can teach us more than successes. And so when we're doing bold learning, we have these opportunities for failures, as long as that failure doesn't take us to a place where we get too scared to keep going. So that's why we want this, but we also want to kind of keep it in check a little bit. All right, so I think this is pretty straightforward. As you have more successes, you're going to be more confident. And confidence is pretty good at competing with doubt. So that can really help us, having successes. We could also talk about the effect that failures have on confidence. So failures could decrease confidence if we treat them a certain way, but they can also increase confidence. So when we have a failure and we come out okay, we can have less fear about that failure in the future. So that relationship is a little less clear, and I'm not going to try and draw that on this diagram. All right, cool. But one way I'll kind of get that on here is talking about community. So one thing that can make us feel a little bit safer about failures is being part of communities that make that okay. And so that's why I have community here having a positive influence on our confidence. So I think that is probably why a lot of us are here today. It certainly is why I keep coming back to this community. And once we find a community like that that's going to help us take advantage of this system, we want to protect that community. And so that gives us a little bit of accountability. So I want to put effort back into this community, and actually, things that I can do to support my community often are bold learning opportunities. And so that accountability that comes with finding a community that's supportive can help promote more bold learning. All right, so that's how I think about this system and why it's important to keep doing bold learning opportunities and the importance that people have in this system. All right, so let's talk in a little bit more detail about how you can avoid some of the hazards that come along with bold learning, because it really can be very scary. So we've talked about accountability. So I think that one's clear. Another thing that's helpful is making connections. And I mean this really in 2 ways. So you can make connections between ideas and topics that you're comfortable with to new things that you're learning. And that often makes it a lot more approachable. It makes you feel a little bit more secure with the concepts that you're learning. So that's one way. Making connections really supports learning. And the other thing is making connections with people, especially people in those supportive communities that we have. All right, so asking for and offering help is another thing. So once we have connections with people in the community, we'll feel a little more secure in asking for help. And, oh, I got some template text up there. Sorry about that. I think I must have did an undo. And then offering help. So offering help also makes you feel good, right? It makes you feel like you have something to offer your community. And it can be a bold learning experience in itself. All right. Setting goals. So I think goals can be helpful with motivation, but also when you start to feel a little bit burnt out or bored or frustrated, goals can, the goals that you've set in the past can give you an opportunity to come back and reassess your progress and whether those goals still make sense for you. So not just setting goals, but also revisiting goals and feeling okay with changing your goals can really help you move forward with new learning experiences. And then taking breaks. Sometimes when you get yourself committed to a lot of different bold learning experiences, it's kind of like the runner who started to get fatigued, and it's hard to keep going. So it's okay to take breaks. That might mean taking breaks from some commitments for a while. It might mean trying to take a break from the voice in your head that's telling you that it's too hard or that you're not good enough. But those connections you made, again, your friends, are going to help you remember once you're rested to come back and get back to the bold learning again. Okay, and then probably the most important thing is your mindset about all of this. So I think a lot of us kind of grow up with, who's heard of like the fixed versus growth mindset before? Okay, so maybe this is a new topic to some people. A fixed mindset is like, I am smart, or I am not capable of this sort of task. So I think there's something innate about me that determines what I can do with my life. A growth mindset is, I can do this. And so that fixed mindset can get in our way a lot of times. But often, a lot of things that we've heard throughout our life can build up that fixed mindset. I know that's something that I've struggled with a lot. And so finding ways to get into that growth mindset, to approach failures as opportunities for learning, is really helpful for this as well. And I'm going to get a little bit cheesy now, so hopefully that'll be okay for you guys. But one way that I think that makes this work for me is coming back to the words in this diagram. So a lot of the words here might feel kind of neutral or actually maybe a little negative. And so let's change that a little bit. So instead of confidence, we can think about faith. So I can have faith that I'm probably going to succeed. I know I've had successes in the past, and I can solve problems as humans. We're pretty good at solving problems unless we get in our own way. So I know I can probably succeed. And even if I don't, I have this community that's backing me up that'll help me put things in perspective. And so that community is really providing me with some trust. And we talked about protecting that community before. For me, that's really love, right? I care about this community. I want it to keep it around. I feel accountable. That's love. I love my community. All right. And all of this is in service of learning, which for me is the most, I skipped one. Sorry about that. So failures, instead of failures, we can think of failures as opportunities to learn something. Because learning is, for me, probably the biggest joy in life. And then that risk becomes a little bit more fun. So this, I think this helps out a lot in approaching that challenge of bold, risky learning experiences. All right, so I want to just quickly kind of talk through some ways that you can help people in your community feel safe to embark on these bold learning adventures. So the goal is not to remove all frustration, because some of that frustration is helpful, but it's to remove the unhelpful frustration. So, for example, most learners, they don't want you to tell them the answer to something, but they want you to help them understand how you'd find the answer, or a clue to get onto the right path. So you can ask questions to make sure that you're giving the help that somebody is asking for in your community, instead of kind of making assumptions and telling them what you think they need to know. When you're doing a tutorial or a talk, one of the things that I've found really helpful for ones that I've attended is checks. I know what to expect when I've done something right or I've done something wrong. So if I run into a problem, I'd like to see some sort of indication of whether that's a problem or not and how to deal with that. Another big one is admitting your own weaknesses and mistakes and showing the thought process that you go through when you figure it out. That's probably one of the most helpful things that you can show somebody else who's embarking on a bold learning experience. All right, and again, doing this is such a great opportunity for you, yourself, to learn. I know that working with other people on projects has really probably helped me learn a lot more than when I'm getting help from somebody else. All right, and the last thing that I want to talk about is turning conferences into learning adventures. So what are some things that you can do today and tomorrow to be a bold learner? So the first thing is set bold learning goals. So I'm kind of got obsessed with goals in the past couple of years because they just seem to apply so well to everything. So I would encourage you to take some time to think about what goals you have for this weekend. You might already have some that you haven't fully formed yet, or you might not have thought about it at all. So that can be really helpful if you have a goal to learn this or to do this weekend. Go ahead and write it down. Figure out some way to make it measurable so that you can check in tonight or tomorrow and see how you did. Another thing that you can do is take some actions that just add a little bit of risk to the conference experience. So one thing is asking questions. So I always have a hard time kind of asking questions, and not necessarily in a talk, but maybe afterwards with a speaker later. So you might want to challenge yourself. If you have trouble with that, you might want to challenge yourself to do that. And remember that those questions should be asked with that love that you have for your community. All right, so starting a conversation is another thing. It's helpful for you and it's helpful for the community. So you're simultaneously making your experience a little bolder and making it safer for somebody else. Offering to help. See something that somebody needs help with, jump in there. You might make a friend, make a connection that will help you later. All of those things are helping build up the community. Some other things that help build up the community are giving feedback to the speakers and organizers. That data is really helpful, so this community can continue to grow and we can get better. And making connections with the other attendees. So what's your learning adventure going to be this weekend? Might be making a new friend, learning something new about Django, finding a mentor or finding someone to mentor, or asking a question. So thank you for listening, and adventure forth, bold learners.